Hi, this is my first paper, Language Usage Among Filipino Americans. Before we begin, let's have a discussion. Mag-usap muna tayo. First, let's talk about your language usage. You can talk about things such as where did you grow up, your current spoken languages, and how comfortable you are with speaking, and the languages that your parents use. For me, I grew up here in Honolulu, Hawaii, and I grew up speaking Tagalog and English. I'm very comfortable at speaking English now, but I grew up with speaking Tagalog. But now I'm somewhat uncomfortable with Tagalog, and I'm taking Filipino classes now to learn Tagalog. And both my parents are both bilingual in English and Tagalog. So imagine you're at a fast food restaurant, for example, Jollibee in this picture. The mom says, "Anong i-order mo sa lunch ngayon?" The child says, "I want chicken joy." Without a doubt, you understood the conversation, even if it was in Tagalog and you have no Tagalog language. It kind of sounds foreign as well. Most people in the world just speak one language at a time, but in certain cases, such as Filipinos, we tend to mix it up. So, with varying degrees of Tagalog knowledge, what's the use of even learning Tagalog? Or any foreign language for that matter? Also, is Americanization a good thing? Before we start off on language usage among Filipino Americans, we have to first define who are the Filipino Americans. First of all, let's talk about the migration to the United States. In the first wave of Filipino migration in the from 1903 to 1934, the Philippines was considered a U.S. territory. The first wave of Filipinos came as pensionados and laborers, or pensionados were Filipino students wanting to get a college education in the United States, and laborers worked at agricultural fields, such as in California and Hawaii. In the second wave of Filipino migration around 1945, the World War II veterans were granted citizenship. In a personal note, my great grandfather was actually part of this group of people that were granted citizenship. And so my aunties and uncles all gained US citizenship. Also, in the third wave of migration to the United States around 1965, through the Hart-Celler Act of 1965, most Filipinos wanting to get an education came here to the United States. First of all, in the first generation of Filipino Americans, they are Filipino English bilingual. They were born in the Philippines and fluent in their home language, but became English dominant here in the United States. In the second generation of Filipino Americans, they primarily use Tagalog to reprimand and to speak to relatives, but they're just English monolingual. They are unable to speak to relatives, and they believe that Tagalog isn't useful in daily language. Also, to define what makes a Filipino American, we also have to um, go over through Filipino customs and traditions. For example, just how Americans can enjoy Mexican food, like consumption or liking Filipino food does not correlate to how close to you are at the Filipino culture with the Filipino culture. Conversely, language, since you are speaking another language opens a gate to another community, you're essentially being closer to your own family and Filipino culture as well. Also, and one of the traits that we Filipinos have is being on Filipino time, which is basically tardiness. If, for some reason, we live in a society where Filipinos aren't accepted, or where being late isn't very accepted in our society, so being on Filipino time does not correspond to how close to you are at being Filipino. Also, there are different language uses among Filipinos. For example, Taglish, which is a combination of English and Tagalog speech, English in schools, and there are different levels of Tagalog knowledge as well. So, my recommendation is to at least learn a cultural language. Knowledge is power, and for me, it opened more doors. Also, Philippine language is not that difficult to learn. It's not as complex as English. And I took a course called Filipino 451, which is basically the structure of Filipino, and it's very thin. It's less than a centimeter thick. Also, personally, I'd like to use Tagalog as a, a secret language. Thank you for listening. Does anyone have any questions? Thank you for so much for listening to my presentation, and good luck speaking multiple languages and enjoying the Filipino culture in general. Maraming salamat po.